Dauntless is dead. Murdered. Our suspects? Incompetent executives? No. Bad devs? No. It was the cryptobros. Dun dun dun. Girl. Queerly beloved, join me, as today we bury Dauntless right next to the subscribe button, because nobody's clicking that, and explore how cryptobros are about to become my 13th reason why, as we ask, what happened to Dauntless? Our story begins in 2014 with the founding of Phoenix Labs. Now, I'm not going to waste too much of your time with this bit. There's a lot of stuff about investments that is otherwise not that interesting, and it makes me sound like I'm reading out of a Wikipedia page. Because I am. The founders, Jesse Houston, Sean Bender, and Robin Main, were all accomplished people within the gaming industry. They've been a part of massive successes like League of Legends, EO, classics like the Tom Clancy series, and the Mass Effect trilogy. But Dauntless was a very different game compared to what they did before, and I think this goes on to highlight the liberating nature of going independent, how you can pursue the type of game you want and fill in a gap in the market that should otherwise not be allowed to tackle in a big company. Released in 2019, Dauntless was designed specifically for that. It's a game that wore its inspiration on its sleeve, being very obviously inspired by the Monster Hunter series. Now, Monster Hunter has been a series that for a long time single-handedly occupied its own niche, without any major competition. So Dauntless was very smartly released as a free-to-play alternative, very willing to fill that space. And honey, fill it did.
Oh honey.
Dauntless understood the core idea of what made Monster Hunter fun, though, in all fairness, it's not exactly rocket science. It's about hunting creatures whiffing miserably, breaking their parts, cutting their tails, making purses out of them. Basically a lot of stuff that sounds like animal abuse, but it's not. These things are creatures, so it's fine. It really understood that when you craft something with the parts of a behemoth you've slain, what you make is not just a piece of equipment, it's a trophy you wear into battle. But it also did a lot of things better. For example, its weapon system focused on a smaller cast of weapon types that were far more approachable and simple. By comparison, Monster Hunter regularly assaults you with a list of 14 weapon types. The introduction to weapons is at this time a running joke for the series, not because it's funny, but because it's been awful since forever. Yes, you could say that they each have a higher skill ceiling than Dauntless, because there's a lot of intricacies and combos, but this boils over into the problem of players being reluctant to use other weapons. Indeed, most players just stick to one weapon, because choosing another weapon type out of 13 and learning all the necessary complexities to make it work is a massive pain point. And that's without even mentioning how some of them have a ridiculous amount of overlap in concept and function. Get this, you have lance and gun lance.
Oh.
And let's not forget the light bowgun, medium bowgun, and of course, heavy bowgun. Visually, it was very smart that they went with a 3D cartoon aesthetic. It was a huge factor in differentiating Dauntless visually, while also enabling them to go in a different creative direction entirely. You see, Monster Hunter feels at times stuck in its realism. While it does help convey the threatening nature of these creatures, it also limits them to a somewhat conventional design. I remember playing Monster Hunter in the old days on my PSP, and I think we can all agree that the Tigrex is one of the more iconic creatures of this series. But honestly, I wouldn't be able to describe it any further than looks like a dragon and attacks like a dragon. This is where Dauntless shined. You had gigantic rodents, owls, porcupine crocodiles, electric shark things.
What the fuck is that?
Each behemoth was visually striking and unique, and they'd all have different identities in combat as well. I played Dauntless pretty much around the time it came out, then I picked it back up several years later, and I still remembered a lot of these monsters. The Gnasher's over-reliance on its tail attacks, the Skarn's ability of using rock offensively and also as an armor, and many others. Their design is what made them unforgettable, because in a way there was a certain personality to their attacks. And their soundtracks were fantastic too, lest I forget. Each behemoth had its own soundtrack, giving them personality, and also achieving this beautiful synesthesia where the music would blend in with what's happening. I still remember the Gnasher's soundtrack and how it synergizes when he's enraged. There was an astounding amount of effort that elevated these behemoths from things you hunt to smaller separate audio-visual experiences. All in all, Dauntless would prove to be a worthy competitor as a live service game. It understood the core principles that made Monster Hunter fun, it went in a different creative direction that allowed it to shine on its own, and even tackled certain things better than its source material, because it couldn't get complacent if it ever hoped to challenge it. And it was also a lovely bit of allyship as well. The Death Drop is one of the first emotes I got and has remained my favorite. Little did we know that the game would drop dead. What now follows are the golden years of Dauntless. Hitting 2 million registrations shortly after release, the game was a financial success via its battle pass and in-game stores, with microtransactions that were unintrusive enough not to irk the free-to-play market. Phoenix Labs would grow as they would pursue to bring Dauntless to consoles with full crossplay and progression functionality. There would be new updates with new biomes, new behemoths, new equipment, and even entire new modes. It even managed to set some impressive records for itself. By all means, Dauntless was settling in the cash cow stage of its live service lifespan, winding down development to fewer but meaningful updates every few months, while financially fueling the studio's newer projects. I returned to the game around later in this period, around mid-2023 on the PS4 via its cross-progression system, and I was surprised to see that the game was alive and well. It sported a healthy player base and new additions that were quite nice. New ways of further upgrading your character and weapons, old behemoths adapted to different elements, which I really enjoyed. I feel like they added a lot of flavor to the idea of the behemoth ecosystem, because of course some of these species would eventually evolve to adapt to new environments. Though I am a bit biased because I love this kind of idea, like I've barely followed Pokemon in recent years, but I still somehow find myself excited at the prospect of old Pokemon getting new forms. And a slew of new behemoths that, much like the previous ones, are visually distinct, have a unique combat identity, and are also accompanied by new soundtracks. The effort they put in did not diminish at any point, and I think that's genuinely admirable. By far, my favorite addition was the Escalation mode, featuring Gauntlet-style gameplay on a linear map per elemental type, with fun modifiers, abilities, and progression, and a unique final boss that pushes the behemoth design to new heights, sometimes literally. It did dilute a bit its player base because they all had separate queues, which could take quite long, but overall, I thought this was a welcome addition that sometimes also adds a bit to its world building, because you were playing through maps that have their own history and lore and architecture. The one thing that irked me was how the maps would now feature several behemoths. The thing about hunting a specific behemoth in its habitat is that it provides that sort of feel that is immersive and personal in a sense. It's you thinking how you're gonna beat this behemoth, it's your only focus and duty. This switch changed that feel to something that is akin to an arcade experience. It exchanges immersion for what is purely the idea of farming. Nonetheless, despite the small grievance, you could tell that Dauntless was still going strong. Now, in a way, I could see that the end was in sight, there weren't many other ways the game could go. Say what you will about Monster Hunter, but making separate installments is smart, because at some point you need a full reset to enjoy the experience again. You could add more behemoths and areas, but eventually the interest would wear off, and you can't just increase the difficulty or level caps infinitely because it makes your experience redundant, or add more and more progression systems because eventually it becomes a nightmare for any new or returning player. That's just the nature of the live service Dauntless was, but even so, I could easily see it being around for like 5 or more years. Little did I know that the game would have barely a fraction of that, because the very next year Dauntless was shot in the heart. Literally, the heart of the game had been removed with surgical precision. You'd be forgiven for thinking that the Awakening update was a return to form. It's surreal to read now the announcement of this update, how Dauntless is back, and all of these heartening statements from the developers, because it was written to make you expect something genuinely exciting in a game currently in its sunset years. But that's not what we got, is it? The Awakening update was such a massive failure that it somehow rippled onto other gaming communities. Overnight, people who didn't know what a Dauntless was knew it now for how absolutely disgustingly awful this singular update was. The Awakening update overhauled the entire weapon system, as in, everything is gone. Hordes of players were logging in to discover that their weapons, and the progress they had, was wiped. quite literally removed. The game would now feature a much smaller cast of weapons, completely removing the option of actually crafting them. Instead, you'd receive some by progressing through the story, but crucially, most of them would now be available through the in-game store through a new currency. And it was very clear that there was one reason behind it all. Well, two. Number one, money. Number two, fuck you. It was around this time that I returned to Dauntless for one final time, to get the Platinum Trophy for the PS5 version, and it was dire. The new weapon system, apart from being a massive disrespect to any veteran of the game, removed a huge chunk of what made Dauntless a worthy competitor to Monster Hunter. The weapon variety was so low that all weapon types had missing damage elements, in a game where elemental damage is key. I can't stress enough that this update was so shit it was antithetical to the game's own design. Each weapon now had to be leveled, either by slaying behemoths or through a new consumable item that, of course, can also be purchased for cash. This is actually the thing they gave you as compensation for wiping all of your progress away, an amount that, by the way, was not nearly enough to even fully level a single weapon. I used them early on, which is a mistake, because once you reach a certain level threshold, you can no longer gain EXP from behemoths. And I also used them on a weapon that I didn't enjoy that much in the end, but because the system was so grindy, I didn't want to change it. This design completely removed the fantastic advantage it had over Monster Hunter, because it encouraged you to stick to grinding out only one weapon. Not one weapon type, mind you, just one singular weapon. And it's very ironic design-wise that now they decided to add the functionality of carrying two weapons. Oh, and also loot boxes became a thing, which is deeply ironic considering that they originally intended to include them back in 2018, but the player reception was so negative they decided not to. So, how did we get here? How can we go from sunshine and rainbows to this absolute clusterfuck in one update? Well, bestie, you see, while I made it sound like everything was going great for Phoenix Labs, things actually got weird. And then they got worse. Back in 2020, they were acquired by Garena for 150 million, hoping that this would help Phoenix Labs expand into the Asian and mobile gaming markets. Ah yes, that fucking cesspool. It's hard to tell whether this move was inherently helpful. It is around the time when Dauntless would go cross-platform, so perhaps this helped somewhat, but nothing else really came out of it. In fact, 3 years later, Phoenix would regain its independence for an undisclosed cost, and weirdly, there weren't a lot of comments from the studio's leadership, unlike the time it got acquired by Garena. By all means, it looked like Phoenix Labs was once again independent. Or were they?
I smell a star.
In 2024, news of layoffs broke, and the principal engineer, Chris Mornes, one of the dismissed employees, released a bombshell. Phoenix Labs was actually acquired by another company over a year ago. Mayank Grover further alleges that the studio never regained independence, that it was bought from Garena itself. This checks out with another statement made by an ex-employee who alleged that the founders let the money get to their head, and Garena eventually ditched them to be bought by a crypto company. And I should say, none of this was disclosed. No one outside knew any of this had happened. All of this was, I think, on purpose kept a secret, because once you know that a game you like is held by a crypto company, you know shit's about to go down. So, who is this mysterious crypto company? Well, let's talk about Forte. Forte is, broadly speaking, a blockchain compliance company that wants to support, like, putting your game on the blockchain or put the blockchain in your game. I don't know, and honestly, who gives a shit? It's cryptobros trying to get into the gaming industry. Essentially, people who try really hard to convince you that they're selling an amazing piece of technology that otherwise does nothing for games and nobody who plays games really wants. But why did they buy Phoenix Labs? Your instinct might be to say that they wanted to convert Dauntless into a blockchain game, and I don't think that's the case. Looking through Forte's website and LinkedIn, I couldn't find any mention of Dauntless or Phoenix Labs, which is weird because it's the sort of company that won't stop talking about its acquisitions and partnerships to paint themselves as a really successful company. Oh great, Zynga partners with Forte for blockchain-based game development. For all the good that's gonna fucking do. Truly a match made in hell. Instead, I think their reasoning for acquiring Phoenix was far more cynical. It was to make money. Violently. I don't think it mattered to them who they'd upset, how disrespectful it was to its player base, or how scummy they would come across. They wanted money, and they wanted it yesterday. It reinforced, once again, that crypto boys don't see games as an entertainment art form, they don't see people as anything beyond the numbers, and that overall, the crypto sphere should just stay the fuck away from the medium of gaming. Actually, here's a side note. Forte did the same thing to another studio, including forcing its employees to secrecy about the studio's acquisition before shutting them down. This is a pattern of, in my opinion, a bad actor, a company that has no business being in the gaming industry, but that otherwise has loads of money it can throw at studios to mismanage them to fuck. Given the update's reception and the studio's unwillingness to roll back its changes, it was very clear that Dauntless could only go one way. Sometime later, it was reported that most of its development team has been laid off, and an announcement was made that Dauntless will be shutting down. And that was just a few days before Monster Hunter Wilds would be released, which I think is the mother of all irony. My last moments with Dauntless were me trying to unlock a trophy that for some reason did not autopop and was by all accounts glitched. I eventually just reset my entire progress, which did work, but it showed just how much of a wreck this game was. Just to look at all of these dialogue boxes with SQL statements, the game was a shadow of its former self, waiting to be put to rest. And that's all I have to say for this video. Well, things got depressing in the end. I want to thank you for watching, subscribe and like if you'd want to help me get noticed by the algorithm, and as always, have a good one.